Shadows of the past. In the dim corridors of post-war Europe, shadows whispered of a new world being born. Nations were rebuilding, lines were being redrawn, and somewhere in the heart of this chaos, a silent force was taking shape. The Mossad. It had been only a few years since the birth of Israel, yet threats surrounded it like hungry wolves. Every border burned with tension. Every neighboring country saw the tiny new nation as an intruder. But for Israel's founding leaders, the real war wasn't just about territory. It was about survival, and survival demanded information. In those early years, when Israel had little more than determination and desperation, a small group of men began to weave a secret web. At its center stood a man with calm eyes and a mind sharper than a blade, Reuven Shiloah, the quiet architect of what would become one of the world's most feared intelligence organizations. Shiloah understood something that few others did. The greatest wars were not fought with tanks or guns, but with whispers, whispers that could ignite nations or destroy them. He envisioned a force that would hear every whisper, follow every shadow, and move unseen, striking before enemies even realized what had happened. The first seeds of Mossad were sown not in the grand halls of government, but in smoky back rooms, in secret meetings between men who trusted no one but each other. They exchanged coded notes, smuggled intelligence through broken radio networks, and relied on instincts honed in the resistance movements of pre-state Palestine. Britain had left behind its vast intelligence machinery, and much of it had fallen into disarray. But for Shiloah, that disarray was an opportunity. He quietly reached out to former British officers, extracting whatever scraps of training and technique he could. Slowly, a pattern began to form, an invisible network, fragile yet growing stronger by the day. By 1949, as Israel's enemies plotted its destruction from Cairo to Damascus, Shiloah and his small team had already begun gathering information from every corner of the Middle East. They built channels in embassies, intercepted military communications, and even planted informants where no one expected them, inside the enemy's own defense councils. These were the days of pure improvisation. There were no satellites, no advanced surveillance systems, only human courage and cunning. Mossad's earliest operatives were teachers, merchants, and students by day, spies by night. Their cover stories were so convincing that even their families often had no idea what they truly did. Each night, coded reports would find their way to Shiloh's desk. Every line was a clue, every phrase a warning. Some nights brought triumph, an intercepted plan, a saved convoy, a discovered mole. Others brought silence, the kind that meant someone hadn't made it back. Yet out of this silence grew something extraordinary, a network of shadows loyal only to Israel. Guided by a single mission, to know before the enemy acts. As the months turned to years, the whispers of Mossad's existence began to reach the world beyond Israel's borders. No one knew its structure, its faces, or its limits. They only knew one thing: wherever Israel's enemies planned in secret, Mossad was already listening. The foundation had been laid. The invisible war had begun. The hidden hand of history and the underground network. The year was 1950. The dust of war had barely settled across Europe, yet beneath the surface, a new and quieter war had already begun, while most nations looked toward rebuilding their economies. One small country, Israel, was building something else entirely, a silent machine that thrived in secrecy. Deep inside Tel Aviv, in a windowless office known only to a handful of government officials, Reuven Shiloah and his newly formed team of operatives were sketching out the blueprint of what the world would one day call the Mossad. But the Mossad was never built in a day, nor by official decree. It was forged in shadows, through trial, error, and blood. Shiloah had gathered around him men and women who had fought in underground movements during the British Mandate. People who understood deception not as a tactic, but as survival. Among them was Tamar Lev, a cryptographer who could decode entire pages of intercepted messages in minutes. Eli Navon, a courier who had crossed borders under a dozen different names. And David Mamone, a strategist who could turn a single clue into an entire network. These were not soldiers, they were ghosts. Israel's early years were marked by desperation. Surrounded by hostile neighbors, the nation had little access to intelligence from beyond its borders. Western agencies, still skeptical of the new state, were cautious in sharing information. So Mossad began to dig its own tunnels into the unknown, and it started with Operation Aleph, an ambitious mission to establish secret communication lines across Europe and the Middle East. Hidden beneath Tel Aviv's Ministry of Foreign Affairs, a small basement was turned into the nerve center of these covert operations. Radios buzzed faintly in the dark, their frequencies constantly shifting to avoid detection. Coded messages were transmitted using everyday commercial language. An order for 5 cases of olives might mean a shipment of intelligence files from Rome. In Paris, a network of undercover agents was established within immigrant Jewish communities. They blended perfectly, working as tailors, traders, and translators, while feeding Mossad with vital information about Arab military envoys and European arms deals. Meanwhile, in Vienna, another cell was tracking the remnants of Nazi officers who had escaped post-war trials. These men carried not just guilt, but secrets that Mossad believed could expose hidden networks supplying weapons to Israel's enemies. One such officer, Karl Adler, a former SS logistics officer, had become the target of a quiet investigation. Mossad didn't intend to harm him, at least not yet, but to use him as a link to something larger, a shadow supply route that connected old war criminals to modern arms traffickers. The hunt for Adler became the turning point, through careful observation and coded exchanges. Mossad agents discovered that he had been meeting representatives from several Middle Eastern intermediaries, men pretending to be oil traders, but in reality brokers of destruction. Shiloah understood immediately, if Israel didn't stop this underground trade, it could face another war before it even finished building its army. So, a new division was quietly formed, Kashet the Bow. It was to operate beyond Israel's borders, gather intelligence without diplomatic cover, and strike only when the threat was undeniable. In one of the first missions under Kashet, an operative posing as a journalist infiltrated an arms meeting in Zurich. The mission was simple: record names, memorize faces, and vanish. But when the agent's coded transmission didn't arrive on schedule, tension gripped the entire Tel Aviv basement. Hours turned into days. Then, one night, a single radio click echoed through the dark. 3 short beeps, the agreed signal for safe. The room exhaled as if life itself had been restored. The data that arrived a week later shocked even Schmidt. It revealed a chain of secret transactions linking Eastern European stockpiles to Middle Eastern buyers. A web of money and betrayal stretching from Prague to Cairo. Mossad's response was swift but invisible. Within weeks, the deals collapsed mysteriously. Ships were rerouted. Documents vanished, and several intermediaries disappeared quietly from public view, never to be seen again. Israel had found its weapon, not in foresight. By 1951, Mossad's network stretched from London to Tehran, and yet outside the intelligence community, almost no one in Israel even knew it existed. For the world, Mossad was still a rumor. For Israel, it had become a shield of silence. In those silent years, every coded transmission, every hidden microfilm, every whispered report added another layer to the invisible wall protecting the new nation. History would never record these names, but the men and women who built Mossad didn't seek recognition, they sought security, and in that pursuit they were ready to walk forever in shadows. The message that changed everything and the man behind the shadows. It was a silent night in Tel Aviv, 1951. The air was thick with tension, not from war, but from uncertainty. Israel had survived its first battles of existence, but now a different kind of war was emerging, one fought through whispers, coded telegrams, and unseen movements in the dark. In a small, dimly lit apartment on Allenby Street, Reuven Shiloah sat alone beside a flickering lamp. Files were scattered across the table, intercepted radio transmissions, torn fragments of Arabic documents, and a single telegram that had arrived just 2 days earlier from an agent in Cairo. The telegram contained only 12 words. The alliance is real. Weapons in transit. 2 days to border. Shiloh's heart sank. This wasn't a rumor, it was confirmation of a coordinated military deal between neighboring states, one that could tilt the fragile balance of the Middle East. Israel was still rebuilding from its last war. It could not survive another. The origin of this message was a man known only by his Cody name, the Sparrow. No one in Mossad knew his real name or face. He had been sending intelligence from Cairo since the days before Israel's independence, always at great personal risk. But this time, his message carried something new, a warning that hinted at betrayal within Israel's own early diplomatic channels. Someone, somewhere, was leaking information. Shiloah knew that this wasn't just a security issue, it was a threat to the very foundation of the new intelligence system he was building. For 3 nights, he didn't sleep. He reread every intercepted line, traced every communication log, until a single pattern emerged, an unexplained gap in coded transmissions between Vienna and Haifa, a gap too precise to be coincidence. He immediately summoned his closest operatives, Tamer, Lev, Eli Navon, and a new recruit, Ariel Benor, a master of disguise who had spent his youth navigating black markets in post-war Europe. Their mission, identify the mole. Benor was sent to Europe under the identity of a Swiss importer. His route took him through Vienna, where he met a contact in an old cafe once frequented by refugees and smugglers alike. It was there, in the fog of cigarette smoke and clinking glasses, that he found his first lead. A courier who had been delivering diplomatic pouches but secretly copied their contents before sealing them. The courier, unaware that he was under observation, was followed for days. Mossad agents watched as he passed an envelope to a man in a grey coat near the Danube. The man's posture, his precision, his calm confidence, it all pointed to one thing: he was trained. When Benor finally intercepted the envelope, the contents were startling maps, coded coordinates, and most importantly, one photograph Reuven Shiloah. The implication was clear: Mossad's founder was being watched. Benor transmitted the findings through a disguised frequency, and within hours the Tel Aviv command center was alive again, radios buzzing, codebooks flying open, agents rushing through corridors. Shiloah remained calm. "If they're watching me," he said, "it means we're close." His instincts were right. Within a week, the network behind the leak was exposed, a chain of foreign informants using European diplomatic cover to pass data through neutral ports. But the real twist came when the Sparrow sent another message: "It's not over. They know I'm here." That was his last transmission. After that, silence. Mossad operatives tried to locate him in Cairo, but every trace had vanished: his apartment, his contacts, even his coded frequency. It was as if he had been erased from existence. For Shiloah, the loss was personal. The Sparrow had not just been a source, he had been a symbol of what Mossad stood for: invisible loyalty, unseen sacrifice. In the days that followed, Shiloah gathered his team in the underground operations room. He placed the Sparrow's last telegram on the wall, next to the Mossad's first official directive. "From today," he said quietly, "our war will never be about borders. It will be about silence and survival." The room fell silent. Each operative understood what that meant. From that moment, Mossad's identity was sealed. Not as a conventional intelligence service, but as a force that would move unseen through history. Outside, Tel Aviv glowed faintly under the moonlight, unaware that beneath its calm streets, a new chapter of shadow warfare had begun, one that would shape the destiny of nations. Birth of the Institute and the Secret Mandate, Tel Aviv, 1949. The nation of Israel was still in its infancy, fragile, wounded, yet burning with determination. Across its narrow streets and dusty offices, new ministries were being born: foreign affairs, defense, immigration. But hidden among them was an unmarked room with no sign on the door. Inside sat Reuven Shiloah, staring at a blank document titled simply, "The Institute," for months. He had been lobbying Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion for one thing: a centralized intelligence body that could coordinate the chaos of information flooding in from around the world. At that time, Israel had at least 5 different intelligence units, from military reconnaissance to foreign desk informants, each working separately, sometimes even against one another. Ben-Gurion, cautious but visionary, finally called a late-night meeting in his Jerusalem residence. The air was heavy with cigarette smoke. A single light illuminated the map of the Middle East spread across the table. Reuven Ben-Gurion said slowly, "We cannot afford confusion anymore. We need one mind, one invisible hand." That night, after hours of heated discussion, a handwritten directive was drafted, known later only as the Secret Mandate. It was never published, never archived officially, and carried no official seal, but its words became law in the invisible corridors of Israel's power. It read, "To protect the State of Israel beyond its borders by all means necessary. To gather knowledge where none is shared, to act where others cannot, and to exist where existence is denied." This was the birth of Mossad, not as an agency, but as an idea bound by silence. Reuven Shiloah became its first director. But unlike the heads of other organizations, his name was never printed on doors or records. The agents under him operated through false identities: engineers, journalists, diplomats, traders. Each one lived 2 lives, often dying under a name that wasn't their own. The first weeks were chaotic. No headquarters, no formal budget, no official recognition. Meetings were held in cafes, reports were written on typewriters borrowed from newspapers, and encrypted messages were sent through embassy telegraphs disguised as trade updates. Yet in that chaos, something extraordinary began to form: discipline born of secrecy. Shiloah divided the newborn institute into 3 primary branches: collection, Tiasomot, responsible for human intelligence and field operatives; research, Tevel, for analysis and diplomatic liaisons; operations, Caesarea, a covert unit for sabotage and high-risk missions abroad. At first, these divisions were little more than paper sketches, but within months, they started to breathe. Mossad's earliest recruits were not career spies. They were survivors, refugees from Europe who had seen the machinery of persecution up close. Men and women who spoke 5 languages, carried multiple passports, and understood what it meant to live in fear yet move undetected. One of them was Yael Koren, a former resistance courier from Poland. Her first assignment was in Rome, tracking former Nazi intelligence officers who were rumored to be aiding anti-Israel movements in Egypt. Another was David Allon, a cryptographer who had once broken German radio codes for the British. Together, they represented Mossad's first generation, untrained but unstoppable. The first field test of the new institute came in early 1950. A coded message from Istanbul suggested that a major shipment of arms was being funneled through the Balkans, destined for groups plotting Israel's destruction. Mossad had no legal authority to operate abroad, no formal recognition from Allied governments. Yet Shiloah gave the order, go. It was the moment Mossad stepped beyond its borders for the first time. 2 agents disguised as shipping brokers infiltrated the trade route, tracing the cargo through Yugoslavia and Greece. By the time the shipment reached its final port, the crates supposedly filled with machine parts were already replaced with harmless scrap metal. The enemy never knew. The mission was a success and an announcement. Mossad had arrived. When the agents returned to Tel Aviv, there were no medals. No ceremonies, only a brief handshake from Shiloah and a quiet remark. From now on, our victories will be written in silence. Over the next months, the Institute's presence grew stronger. A small office was finally secured, hidden within the Foreign Ministry's complex, under the label Liaison Section. To outsiders, it appeared to handle routine diplomatic communication. In truth, it was the heart of a growing web of global intelligence. Meanwhile, a new motto began circulating among operatives, whispered, never printed. The unseen protects the living. By late 1950, the Mossad had moved from makeshift secrecy to operational precision. Agents were deployed across Europe, North Africa, and the Middle East. Codenames replaced real names, invisible ink replaced signatures, and silence became the first law. No one outside a small circle in Jerusalem even knew Mossad existed, and that was exactly how Shiloah wanted it. Because, as he said in one of his few recorded notes to Ben-Gurion, the world will never fear what it cannot see, and thus beneath the surface of a young, uncertain nation. An invisible empire began to grow, one that would shape the destiny of intelligence warfare for generations to come. Allies and rivals, and the first mission abroad, London. 1951. Rain slid down the fogged windows of the Israeli embassy. Inside, 3 men sat around a narrow table cluttered with teacups and intelligence folders. Among them was Reuven Shiloah, the quiet founder of Mossad. Across from him sat 2 figures, Harold Bingham, a liaison officer from MI6, and James R. Donovan, an attach from the newly formed CIA. For the first time, the invisible world of intelligence had gathered Israel into its circle. The British were cautious, skeptical of this young nation's ambitions. The Americans were curious, watching to see whether Israel's fledgling intelligence arm could survive in the shark tank of global espionage. Bingham leaned forward, his voice dry but deliberate. "Your people have experience in resistance, yes. But intelligence, that's a different game entirely." Shiloah smiled faintly, replying, "Resistance taught us how to live in the dark. Intelligence will teach us how to light a candle without being seen." That subtle line changed the room. For the first time, MI6 and CIA realized Mossad was not to be underestimated. Over the next few weeks, cautious cooperation began. CIA shared limited signals intelligence about Soviet movements in the Middle East. MI6 provided old colonial maps and trade route data. In return, Mossad offered access to something far more valuable: human networks in regions the West could not easily reach. While Britain and America were busy rebuilding post-war Europe, Mossad quietly built bridges into Arab capitals, refugee communities, and forgotten European cities. Its agents moved like whispers between worlds, fluent in Arabic, French, German, and Persian, invisible in plain sight. And then came Mossad's first major mission abroad, a test that would either establish its reputation or erase it completely. The target, a former Nazi intelligence officer named Karl van Heusen, who had been working as a military advisor to an anti-Israel faction in Egypt. Van Heusen was indeed just any officer. He had designed tracking systems for the German army during World War II. If Egypt gained that expertise, it could devastate Israel's early warning defenses. Mossad's mission was simple: find him, identify his network, and eliminate the threat without leaving a trace. 3 operatives were chosen: Yael Koren, posing as a journalist from a Swiss news agency; David Allon, a businessman dealing in machine exports; Rafi Cohen, a logistics officer, handling communication with Tel Aviv. They set up base in Cairo, under layers of false documentation created by Mossad's forgers, passports that could survive any embassy inspection, and identities so convincing that even neighbors trusted their stories. Their first step: infiltration through Cairo's European clubs, where old German officers often gathered under the guise of social circles. There Yael met Van Heusen, a tall man with silver hair and cold blue eyes, the kind that never smiled. He believed her story of being a reporter documenting post-war veterans rebuilding the Middle East. Over several meetings, she extracted small fragments: his business partners, his travel patterns, and his hidden workshop near Alexandria. Every detail was coded and transmitted through radio bursts hidden inside a typewriter case. Meanwhile, Mossad analysts in Tel Aviv pieced together the puzzle. Van Heusen was not just supplying intelligence, he was designing radar systems for Egypt's Air Force. The decision came from Shiloah himself: neutralize him quietly. One evening, as Van Heusen prepared to leave Cairo for Alexandria, his car broke down along a desolate road. 2 men stopped to help. By the next morning, the vehicle was found abandoned, keys still in ignition. Van Heusen had vanished. His disappearance was never reported in newspapers, not a single trace. But in Tel Aviv, a telegram arrived from Cairo. It read only, "Shipment cancelled. Silence maintained." Mossad's first overseas operation was complete, clean, quiet, and absolute. Word of the operation spread quietly among Allied circles. CIA analysts noted it in an internal memo. New Israeli intelligence organization demonstrates advanced field tradecraft, operates with precision and moral clarity. Recommend discreet partnership. MI6 was impressed, but wary. They saw in Mossad a younger version of themselves, relentless, cunning, but unpredictable. Ben-Gurion received a private briefing from Shiloah days later. When the Prime Minister asked how he managed such success without formal resources, Shiloah simply replied, "We don't wait for permission. We act when silence demands action." That philosophy became the foundation of Mossad's future. Through the early 1950s, Mossad quietly expanded its network of alliances, sometimes working with Western powers, sometimes working around them. Its agents appeared in Berlin, Rome, Athens, and even Buenos Aires. Each success strengthened its reputation, an organization that existed without acknowledgement. Yet everyone in the intelligence world knew it was there. By 1952, Mossad had earned its seat, not officially, but undeniably, among the global elite of espionage. And so, from the smoky rooms of London to the deserts of Cairo, a new kind of intelligence agency had emerged, one that didn't just protect a nation, but defined the art of invisible warfare. The network expands, and inside the shadows, Tel Aviv, 1952. The hum of typewriters echoed in Mossad's temporary headquarters, a modest building that once served as a textile warehouse. Inside, maps covered every wall, lines connecting cities, red pins marking contacts, blue pins marking safe houses. What began as a handful of men had now become a web stretching across 3 continents. Reuven Shiloah sat at his desk, reviewing coded reports arriving from Cairo, Istanbul, and Rome. Mossad's first mission abroad had been a silent victory, but silence was never permanent in espionage. Success only led to deeper shadows. Israel was now facing a new kind of war, one fought not with armies, but with information. Arab states were buying Soviet weapons, recruiting former German scientists, and forming covert alliances. Mossad's survival depended on staying one step ahead of every move. That's when a new figure entered the stage, Issa Herol, a man who saw espionage not as a job, but as a moral duty. Small in stature, intense in gaze, he believed secrecy was sacred and trust was a luxury. When Herol took over Mossad's leadership, the agency began to evolve from a scattered network into a disciplined machine. His first directive was simple: information is power, but control is survival. Build me a web that sees everything. Under Herol's command, Mossad expanded rapidly. Recruitment shifted from military veterans to multilingual civilians, students, traders, journalists, and diplomats. Each was trained not in violence, but in observation and manipulation. In Europe, Mossad's new front was the post-war refugee crisis. Disguised as humanitarian volunteers, its operatives moved through displaced persons camps, listening to stories, tracing names, and identifying former Nazi collaborators who had vanished into new identities. Meanwhile, in the Middle East, Mossad built the Sionim network, volunteer helpers of Jewish descent living abroad. But these individuals were not agents, but assets, hotel owners, car rental managers, doctors, and bankers. They didn't spy for money. They helped for belief. A single phone call could provide safe housing, vehicles, or information, no questions asked. This system gave Mossad something no other agency had: a global reach without a global footprint, in one operation. A scion working as a clerk in a Paris travel agency quietly forwarded passenger lists of flights heading to Cairo. In another, a doctor in Morocco provided Mossad operatives with medical certificates under false names. The agency became a ghost embedded within everyday life. But shadows always attract other shadows. One morning in late 1953, an encrypted message arrived from Europe. A Mossad contact in Vienna had gone missing. His last known message contained 3 words: "They found me." Investigation revealed that Soviet agents had intercepted Mossad's Korea line, a dangerous breach that threatened the entire European network. Herol's response was swift and severe. Within weeks, the Vienna cell was dismantled, all contact routes changed, and communication shifted to a new cipher system developed in Tel Aviv. From that day onward, Mossad operated under one iron rule: trust no line that travels twice. Even within Israel, only 3 people ever saw the complete network map. Everyone else knew only fragments, a design that ensured no one person could betray the whole. By 1954, Mossad's name had begun to circulate quietly among Western intelligence circles. CIA analysts described it as a ghost with a conscience. MI6 called it the youngest but most unpredictable player in the field. In reality, Mossad's strength came from something much simpler: adaptability. Where others relied on vast budgets and bureaucracies, Mossad relied on improvisation, language, and the human instinct for survival. Herol himself often said to his officers, "Our enemy has tanks. We have patience." That patience paid off. In one remarkable operation, Mossad intercepted secret shipments of weapons traveling from Czechoslovakia to Syria, not by attacking but by rerouting the shipment using forged documents. By the time the crates arrived in Damascus, they were filled not with rifles but cement bricks. The Syrian handlers never discovered who had done it. But in Tel Aviv, the operation was recorded under one word: ghost. Yet, beneath the victories, something deeper began to stir inside Herol. He knew Mossad could no longer only defend Israel from external threats, it now had to hunt the ghosts of the past, the Nazi fugitives who had escaped justice. Those who carried the secrets of the Holocaust were still alive and moving freely across South America and Europe, and thus began the next chapter of Mossad's purpose, one that would transform it from an agency of defense into an agency of memory and justice. From this point on, the organization's horizon shifted from borders to conscience. The world of espionage would never be the same again. The Arab Intelligence Front and the Silent War begins 1950s, the decade when Israel was young, fragile and surrounded by hostile neighbors. Every border hummed with tension. Every night carried whispers of attack. But there was another war, a war of shadows, invisible to the world. In the heart of Tel Aviv, behind a nondescript grey building with no signs or markings, a secret meeting took place inside Mossad headquarters. Is Haherel, the agency's brilliant yet quiet director, stood over a map covered with red pins: Cairo, Damascus, Beirut, Amman, and Baghdad. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice low but steady, "the armies can wait. Our real battle is with their minds and their spies." It was the birth of what Mossad later called the Silent War. Phase 1, the Arab intelligence awakens. By 1952, Arab nations had begun strengthening their own intelligence networks. Egypt formed the Mukhabarat, with Soviet advisors training its officers. Syria relied on its powerful military intelligence, run by ex-French agents. Jordan's General Intelligence Directorate, GID, focused on internal dissent but began infiltrating across borders. Each of these agencies had one shared objective: penetrate Israel and destroy Mossad's growing network. Mossad, though still small and underfunded, responded not with numbers but with intellect. Herel's doctrine was simple: a single whisper can stop a war before it begins. Phase 2 Eyes in Cairo, 1954. A young Mossad operative named Evraham Dar, codename John Darling, walked the narrow streets of Heliopolis, disguised as a British businessman. His mission: establish contact with Egyptian Jews who could feed intelligence about the new Egyptian arms deal with Czechoslovakia. But something went wrong. An operation codenamed Susanna, involving sabotage of Western targets in Egypt, was compromised. Several Egyptian Jews were arrested, 2 were executed. Though this incident became known in history as the Lavon Affair, within Mossad it was remembered differently, as the lesson of Cairo. It taught them that failure in the shadows could destroy lives in daylight. From that day forward, Mossad changed its strategy. Fewer agents, deeper covers, and absolute compartmentalization. Phase 3 Operation Whispernet. By 1956, Mossad began establishing listening posts across the Middle East, using embassies, trading companies, and even shipping offices as fronts. A key success came when an undercover team in Beirut intercepted radio communications between Syrian officers and their agents in Jordan. The discovery prevented a planned cross-border raid, saving dozens of Israeli soldiers. Mossad began calling such invisible victories silent wins. No medals. No headlines, just a small entry in the agency's secret ledger marked with a single Hebrew word, victory. Phase 4. The Battle of the Mines. While Arab agencies tried to recruit informants inside Israel, Mossad built psychological traps. Using fake defectors, double agents, and misinformation, they fed controlled leaks that confused their enemies for years. In Damascus, a Syrian colonel once bragged to the Soviet KGB about having a man inside Mossad. In truth, that man was Mossad's own plant, an illusion carefully crafted by Tel Aviv's psychological operations team. The real power, Mossad realized, wasn't in killing, but in controlling the enemy's perception of reality. Phase 5. The Shadow War intensifies. 1958 tension reached its peak when Mossad discovered a secret Arab summit discussing a coordinated invasion plan. Through a Lebanese journalist secretly working for Mossad, Tel Aviv received early warning. Instead of confrontation, Mossad fed misinformation suggesting Israel had new, advanced Western weapons. The bluff worked. The planned invasion dissolved within weeks. Issa Herrell noted in his diary, "We didn't fire a single shot, but we won a war that never made the news." Phase 6. Birth of the Shadow Doctrine. By the end of the decade, Mossad had developed a guiding philosophy: defense through deception. They didn't rely on massive military strength. They relied on foresight, manipulation, and surgical precision. Their field agents became masters of disguise. Their analysts built psychological profiles of every Arab leader, and their networks stretched silently from Tehran to Casablanca. The agency's silence was its weapon, its invisibility, its power, and as one Mossad operative later said, "In those years, we weren't just fighting our enemy spies, we were fighting their certainty." The result, a new balance of fear. By 1959. The silent war had drawn invisible boundaries across the Middle East. Arab agencies learned to fear shadows that might not even exist. Every phone call, every face in a cafe, every new neighbor could be Mossad. Israel's borders remained tense, but within the intelligence world, Mossad had already achieved what its generals could not: strategic deterrence through pure intelligence mastery. Issa Herrell, reviewing the decade, wrote in his private report, "They thought we were surrounded by armies. They didn't see we had surrounded them with silence." At Operation Finale. The capture of Adolf Eichmann, Buenos Aires, Argentina, a menos 1960, the city buzzed with football fever and tango music. But in a quiet neighborhood called San Fernando, Mossad agents watched a simple two-story house as if it were the center of the world for nearly 2 years. The man living there, known to locals as Ricardo Clement, had been under discreet surveillance. He was cautious, quiet, and punctual. But beneath his mild exterior, Mossad knew hid one of the most wanted men in history. Adolf Eichmann, the architect of the Holocaust. Inside Mossad headquarters in Tel Aviv, Isa Herol, the agency's director, gathered his top team in a secure underground chamber. On the wall hung a map of Argentina dotted with colored pins and photographs. Herol's eyes moved from face to face. "Gentlemen," he said, "this operation is not just for Israel. It is for the 6 million who cannot speak for themselves." The mission was given a code name, Operation Finale. Amif Chiza Azofishi, it would become one of the most daring and precise manhunts in intelligence history. Phase 1, the team assembles a small team of Mossad agents and Shin Bet operatives were handpicked. Among them were Rafi Eitan, a seasoned field commander, Peter Markin, an expert in disguise and hand-to-hand capture, and Avraham Shalom, the logistics brain of the mission. They carried no weapons except small handguns and tranquilizers. Their goal was not to kill Eichmann, but to capture him alive, smuggle him out of Argentina, and bring him to trial in Jerusalem. Each operative adopted a false identity: businessmen, mechanics, tourists. They arrived in Argentina separately, over several weeks, carrying forged passports and coded instructions. Their local contact, a Jewish tailor named Shmuel, provided shelter and a basement for equipment storage. In that dim, humid room, the plan for one of Mossad's greatest operations took shape. Phase 2, the pattern of routine Eichmann's daily habits was studied with military precision. He left his home at 7:40 p.m. each evening to take a bus from Garibaldi Street, returning around 8:10. Mossad's plan depended on these 10 minutes. 4 nights, agents rehearsed the capture, timing the car engines, the positioning of headlights, the code phrases. Every move had to be exact. There would be no second chance. Herol's command was clear: we act only when we are sure. No noise, no blood. The world must never see us coming. Phase 3, the ambush, May 11, 1960. Rain clouds loomed over Buenos Aires as the team prepared. The streets were quiet. In the car sat Malkin, Eitan, and 2 backup agents. Their hearts pounded as the minutes dragged by. 7:40, 7:45, 8 o'clock. Then the man appeared. Grey suit, hat, briefcase, walking the same path as always. Malkin stepped out, pretending to fix the car's headlight. As Eichmann passed, Malkin whispered, "Un momentito, signor," and lunged forward. Eichmann fought briefly, but within seconds he was pinned to the ground and pushed into the waiting car. No shots fired, no noise, just a scuffle in the rain, and then silence. Eichmann was driven to a safe house on the outskirts of the city. For 9 days, Mossad agents kept him hidden, feeding him, interrogating him, and confirming beyond doubt that he was indeed the real Adolf Eichmann. When asked his name, he finally said softly, "Ich bin Adolf Eichmann." Phase 4, the extraction. The next challenge was even greater: how to get Eichmann out of Argentina without alerting the authorities. Mossad had arranged for an El Al flight returning from Argentina's Independence Day celebrations, carrying Israeli diplomats. But Eichmann was sedated, dressed in an airline uniform, and given the identity of a sick Israeli crew member. On May 20, 1960, the plane lifted off from Buenos Aires, and with it, Mossad carried one of history's darkest figures into the hands of justice. The moment the aircraft crossed into international airspace, Isher Herald radioed to Jerusalem. The messenger from hell is on his way to stand trial. Aftermath: the trial of the century. In 1961, the world watched as Adolf Eichmann stood in a glass booth in a Jerusalem courtroom. Survivors testified, tears fell, and the world heard, perhaps for the first time in detail, the bureaucratic horror behind the Holocaust. Eichmann's calm, emotionless demeanor shocked many. He claimed he had only followed orders, but the trial established a moral precedent. Obedience was no defense for atrocity. On December 15, 1961, he was found guilty of crimes against humanity and hanged the following year. Legacy of Operation Finale. Operation Finale transformed Mossad from a regional intelligence service into a global legend. It proved that no criminal, no matter how powerful or distant, could escape justice forever. The success of the mission also reshaped international intelligence cooperation. Western agencies, once skeptical of Israel's young spy network, began to share intelligence, recognizing Mossad's precision and moral clarity. But inside Mossad, the victory was bittersweet. Agents who had risked everything returned to anonymity. Their names remained classified for decades. As one operative wrote in his private journal, "We captured a man, but what we really seized was a shadow from humanity's darkest night." Isher Herald, in his final report, simply wrote, "Justice does not fade with time. It only waits for those who will chase it." Building the code of silence, and the world takes notice. The year was 1960. The world had entered a new decade. Yet the scars of World War II were still visible, and so were its ghosts. Among those ghosts was one man whose name still made the survivors tremble: Adolf Eichmann, the architect of the Holocaust. For years, Mossad had hunted Nazi fugitives scattered across South America. But Eichmann, the most wanted of them all, had vanished like smoke. Many believed he had died. Mossad did not. And in this relentless pursuit, a new identity of Mossad was born, an agency not of revenge, but of remembrance. Phase 1, the whisper in Buenos Aires. It began with a single whisper. A Jewish refugee in Argentina wrote to an Israeli prosecutor claiming that his daughter had a German boyfriend who casually mentioned his father was a high-ranking SS officer. That message traveled quietly to Tel Aviv. Within weeks, Mossad had dispatched a small reconnaissance team to Buenos Aires under false identities: engineers, traders, diplomats, none of them what they appeared to be. Among them was Xv Aharoni, a German-born Mossad operative fluent in several European languages. He moved through the crowded streets of Buenos Aires like a ghost, photographing, listening, watching. And then, one night, he saw him, a thin man in his 50s, wearing round glasses, stepping off a bus near Garibaldi Street. His gait, his routine, his silence, everything matched the files. Mossad had found Eichmann. Phase 2, the Operation of Shadows. The mission was codenamed Operation Finale, not for vengeance, but for closure. The order from Isa Herrell was clear: we do not kill him, we bring him home alive. Let the world hear his crimes in a court of law. For weeks, Mossad operatives observed Eichmann's every move, his bus schedule, his evening walks, even the way he adjusted his glasses before crossing the road. The agents rented a safe house, rehearsed the abduction dozens of times, and prepared an escape route involving forged documents and an El Al diplomatic flight. It was precision beyond imagination, a chess game played in real time. Phase 3. The night of capture, May 11, 1960, Buenos Aires. The streets were quiet, the air heavy. Aharoni and his team waited inside a black Chevrolet. As the last bus of the evening stopped, Eichmann stepped off, walking the same lonely path he took every night. Aharoni whispered into his earpiece, "Target confirmed." Two men approached. One stumbled to make it seem accidental. Another clamped a hand over Eichmann's mouth. He was dragged into the car without a sound. No gunshots, no shouting, only silence. Within minutes, the man who once commanded millions of soldiers vanished from the streets of Argentina, consumed by the very shadows he never believed in. Phase 4, the hidden journey home. For 9 days, Mossad held Eichmann in a safe house on the outskirts of Buenos Aires. They interrogated him gently but firmly. He denied nothing. Perhaps he couldn't. On May 20, 1960, under the cover of an Israeli diplomatic delegation celebrating Argentina's Independence Day, Mossad operatives smuggled Eichmann aboard an El Al aircraft disguised as an unconscious patient wearing an airline uniform. At 11:35 p.m., the plane lifted off the runway, carrying not just a man, but the weight of history itself. As it soared over the Atlantic, one Mossad agent quietly said, "For the first time, we've brought justice, not with bullets, but with memory." Phase 5, the world reacts. When Israel announced Eichmann's capture, the world stopped. Newspapers screamed the headlines. Governments protested, and the UN debated whether Israel had the right to seize a fugitive from another country. But survivors of the Holocaust wept with relief. For them, Mossad had done what no one else dared. They made justice visible. Inside Mossad, the mission changed everything. It was no longer just an intelligence agency. It had become the moral conscience of a nation. Phase 6, the Code of Silence. After Eichmann's trial and execution in 1962, Mossad drew one defining lesson. Our greatest strength is not our stories, but our silence. From that moment on, a code of silence was written into the agency's culture. No operative's real name was ever revealed, no mission was publicly claimed, no recognition, no fame. Agents who succeeded disappeared quietly into normal life, carrying invisible medals in their memories. The philosophy was simple: victory belongs to the shadows. Phase 7, the transformation. In the wake of Operation Finale, world intelligence agencies began to take Mossad seriously. CIA analysts studied their methods. MI6 officers quietly admired their precision, and Soviet intelligence, though silent, began referring to them as the ghosts of Tel Aviv. For Israel, Mossad was no longer a secret. It was a legend. Yet inside its walls, the mood was solemn. No one celebrated. No one smiled. They had captured a monster, but also learned how dangerous silence could be, because now everyone in the world wanted to know that who are the men who can reach anyone, anywhere. Phase 8, Legacy of the Mission Operation Finale, marked the end of one era and the birth of another. It gave Mossad a global reputation, not of terror but of precision and patience. It also sent a message to enemies and allies alike. Time does not erase justice. Mossad will find you, no matter where you hide. But even more important than that, it forged an internal code that still defines Mossad today. Act in silence. Serve without recognition. Never seek glory, only truth. And thus, as the 1960s dawned, the agency that was born out of necessity had become something far greater, a guardian of memory, working in the dark to protect the living and honor the dead. End of Part 9. Building the Code of Silence, and the World Takes Notice. From chaos to control and the dawn of shadows, the 1960s had changed the face of the world. Wars were no longer fought only with guns, but with information, deception, and silence. Israel, still young, found itself in a storm of enemies and uncertainty. But in that storm, Mossad discovered its true purpose: to see before others could act. After the success of Operation Finale, Issa Harel, Mossad's founding director, believed the agency must never rest. He wanted to protect Israel from every threat, visible or unseen. Yet, even within Mossad, new ideas were rising. The conflict of visions. A younger officer, Meir Amet, believed Mossad must expand, build networks, share intelligence with allies, and predict global events. Harel disagreed. He wanted Mossad to remain secretive, loyal only to Jewish survival. This silent clash of ideologies shaped Mossad's future. And when a key foreign scientist assisting Israel disappeared under mysterious circumstances, suspicion tore through the agency. Harel blamed internal betrayal and eventually resigned. In 1963, Meir Amit took control. Under him, Mossad would move from defense to dominance, from reaction to prediction. The web expands. Amit's Mossad spread quietly across Europe and the Middle East. Agents worked as diplomats, businessmen, even airline staff. Information became their weapon, relationships their armor. He formed deep ties with the CIA, French intelligence, and other Western networks, creating a silent alliance against chaos. His philosophy was simple. The most powerful weapon is knowing tomorrow, today. Through coded telexes and secret couriers, Mossad gathered fragments of information that could change wars. The Six-Day War, the test of intelligence. By 1967, Egypt, Syria, and Jordan were preparing for war. But Mossad already knew every movement, every secret plan. Its spies had infiltrated enemy communications, confirming that Egypt's air force would strike first. When the war began, Israel's jets struck before dawn, destroying enemy planes on the ground. The Six-Day War ended in a week, shocking the world. Much of that victory belonged not to armies, but to Mossad's invisible eyes. The age of shadows after the war, Mossad's confidence grew, but so did its challenges. Enemies began plotting revenge, and new terrorist networks formed across the region. Amit's successor, Zvi Zamir, introduced the shadow doctrine. We do not fight wars. We prevent them before they begin. Under Zamir Mossad's, agents lived new lives, false names, new faiths, and long-term identities. They gathered intelligence not through force, but through trust, charm, and silence. These operatives became ghosts who lived among their enemies, unseen but always present. Secrecy becomes faith inside Mossad headquarters. Secrecy became sacred. Agents were told, "You will never be known. But because of you, a nation will live." Files were destroyed after missions. Even governments didn't know the full truth of Mossad's actions. Each operation was a closed circle. The fewer who knew, the safer it was. This discipline turned Mossad into one of the world's most respected and feared intelligence services. The legacy of Issa Herol, though retired. Issa Herol's words still echoed through Mossad's halls. The moment we forget why we were created, we become what we fight. His vision, intelligence with purpose, power with morality, became Mossad's guiding code. The agency would strike when it must, but never for fame or revenge. The dawn of shadows, by the early 1970s, Mossad had become a symbol of unseen power. Its actions were never public, its agents never known, but its results were written across history, in wars prevented, lives protected, and threats erased before they were born. From the chaos of its creation, Mossad had built control. From fear, it had built discipline. And from the deepest shadows, it had built a legend, one that still walks unseen. End of Part 10, From Chaos to Control and the Dawn of Shadows.